September means 7. October means 8. November means 9. December means 10. You have known these words your entire life. You use them on every form you fill out, every appointment you book, every birthday you remember. And every single time you use them, they are wrong. Not metaphorically wrong, not wrong in some philosophical sense we could argue about over coffee. Arithmetically, empirically, documentably wrong. September is the 9th month. October is the 10th. November is the 11th. December is the 12th. The names say otherwise. And the reason the names say otherwise tells you something very specific about who gets to edit reality and what happens when nobody ever edits it back. Look, I want to be precise about this from the start because I know how it sounds. This is not a conspiracy. There is no shadowy council still meeting somewhere to keep the months confused. What there is, and this is almost stranger, is an institution that made a change 2,700 years ago for entirely mundane political reasons. And the residue of that change is still sitting in your phone, in your wall calendar, in the way you talk about time, completely untouched. The mechanism was this. Around 713 BCE, a Roman king named Numa Pompilius added 2 months to a 10-month calendar. He inserted January and February at the front. The calendar had been March through December. 10 months, the names counting correctly from 1 to 10. Numa slid 2 new months into the front of the line. September did not become the 11th month. It stayed September. The name stayed. Only the position changed. And here is what the record actually shows. Nobody ever updated the names. Not in 713 BCE, not during the Julian reform of 46 BCE, not during the Gregorian reform of 1582. 2.5 millennia of astronomers, mathematicians, and popes, and not one of them fixed the names. The words just calcified, which somehow is not the strange part. The strange part is the mechanism behind Numa's calendar and behind every Roman calendar that followed. Because once you see it, you cannot look at the phrase institutional time the same way again. The Roman calendar was not administered by scientists. It was administered by a college of priests called the pontifices. They were the ones who announced when a new month had begun, who decided when an intercalary month needed to be inserted to keep the calendar roughly aligned with the sun, and who determined, crucially, how long any given year would actually be. Think about what that means. The length of a political term was measured in calendar years. The date a contract expired was a calendar date. The timing of elections, the duration of a military command, the moment a rival's legal protection ran out. All of it lived inside the calendar. And the calendar was controlled by the pontifices. Controlling the calendar meant controlling when a rival's term expired. You could literally shorten a political enemy's power by calling in a favor with the right priest, or extend an ally's command by inserting a bonus month. Julius Caesar. And this is documented. This is not speculation. Julius Caesar used calendar manipulation as a political instrument before he reformed the calendar entirely in 46 BCE, partly to strip that power away from the priests. The calendar was not a neutral tool for measuring time. It was a lever. It had always been a lever. And the people who held it knew exactly what it was for. Now, I want to go back much further, because the story of how humans have tracked time does not begin in Rome, and it does not begin with priests, and it does not begin with any institution at all. In 1960, a Belgian archaeologist named Jean de Heinzelin was excavating a site called Ishango on the shore of Lake Edward, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. He found a small bone, a fibula, most likely from a baboon, about 10 centimeters long, covered in carefully incised notches arranged in 3 columns. The bone was dated by the sediment layer it came from to somewhere between 18,000 and 25,000 years ago. The notches, when de Heinzelin counted them, summed to 60 in the first column, 48 in the second, and 60 in the third. That is a total of 168. A lunar year, 12 synodic months, is 354 days. Half of 354 is 177. The bone is not a perfect lunar calendar, but the groupings within the columns correspond remarkably well to the phases of the moon counted across 6 months. The waxing and waning tracked in pairs, the new moon and the full moon marked off in sequence. A mathematician named Alexander Marshak examined the bone in the 1970s and argued it was almost certainly a 6-month lunar count. Other scholars have pushed back. Some believe the groupings are arithmetic, possibly related to prime numbers. Others think they represent a simple tally of days. The debate is real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But here is what is not debated. The Ishango bone is one of the oldest mathematical objects ever found. It is currently in the Musée Royal de l'Afrique Centrale in Brussels. And whoever made it was counting something, methodically, repeatedly, across a very long time. They were not writing laws. They were not administering a temple. They were sitting somewhere 20,000 years ago and watching the sky change and marking what they saw. And here is the thing that kept pulling me back when I first came across the bone. The overwhelming probability is that its maker was a woman. This is not a political claim. It is a biological one. The lunar cycle and the human menstrual cycle share a period of approximately 29.5 days with a precision that is not coincidental. It is the result of millions of years of evolutionary synchronization, the same synchronization that left its fingerprint in dozens of languages across multiple continents, in the shared etymological root that connects the words for moon, for month, and for menstruation in Latin, in Greek, in Sanskrit, in Old English, in Germanic, in Slavic, in many branches of the Afro-Asiatic family. The word menstruation comes from the Latin mensis, which means month, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European root me, which also gives us moon. This is not a metaphor. This is etymology. The calendar, in its oldest and most coherent form, was almost certainly not invented by priests or kings or astronomers. It was kept by the people whose bodies already knew the count, which means the Ishango bone, sitting in a museum in Brussels, 20,000 years old, notched by hand in the dark, may be the oldest surviving record of a woman tracking her own biology against the sky. I sat with that for a long time before writing it down. Which brings us to the problem of the month as a unit of measurement. Because the month, as it currently exists in the Gregorian calendar, is not a lunar month. It is not 29.5 days. It is a completely artificial and inconsistent chunk of time that ranges from 28 to 31 days, that bears no relationship to any astronomical event, and that was constructed, frankly, as a political compromise between a solar year and the inherited residue of a calendar that nobody ever cleaned up. And here is the economic argument, which is the one that lands hardest once you see it. Your rent for February and your rent for March are identical, despite March having 3 extra days. Your salary for February and your salary for March are usually identical. That gap, between the time you pay for and the time you receive, always favors the same party. February gives your landlord and your employer 3 extra days of value at no cost to them. 12 times a year, the inconsistency of the month is a quiet subsidy flowing in one direction. I checked this against 3 separate sources before I said it out loud, and the math is exactly as simple as it sounds. Now, here is where it gets genuinely strange, because this is not a problem nobody noticed. It is a problem that was almost solved within living memory, defeated by a margin that still seems impossible. In 1923, the League of Nations, the predecessor to the United Nations, convened a calendar reform committee. They received 130 proposals from governments, academics, businesses, and individuals across 37 countries. The committee reviewed all 130. They ranked them, and the proposal that came out on top, the one the committee formally recommended as the most rational, most stable, most universally beneficial restructuring of the calendar, was called the International Fixed Calendar, and it had been developed by a Scottish statistician named Moses Cotsworth beginning in 1902. The proposal was this: 13 months of exactly 28 days each, plus one extra day at the end of the year, Year Day, that belonged to no month and no week. Every month would be identical. Every date would fall on the same day of the week, every year, forever. The first of every month would always be a Sunday. Payday, quarter end, the start of every reporting period. Fixed, predictable, perpetually aligned. No more February anomaly. No more irregular quarters distorting financial comparisons. The calendar would finally be what it claimed to be: a rational instrument for measuring time. If you are still here and somehow still comfortable with the month of October, hit subscribe. We go much deeper on this every week, because what I'm about to tell you about why this proposal failed is, I think, the most quietly devastating part of the whole story. The International Fixed Calendar was not just a proposal, it was a working proof of concept. George Eastman, founder of Eastman Kodak, adopted it for his company's internal operations in 1928. Kodak ran on 13 months from 1928 until 1989. 61 years. The employees were not confused. The accounting was cleaner. Every reporting period was identical in length, which meant every year-over-year comparison was a genuine apples-to-apples comparison rather than a comparison distorted by the fact that one quarter had more Mondays in it than the other. Working. For 6 decades. When Eastman retired and eventually died, Kodak stayed on the fixed calendar. When new management came in, Kodak stayed on the fixed calendar. It took until 1989, 61 years of demonstrated, documented, functional operation, before anyone changed it back. No one changed it back because it stopped working. They changed it back because the rest of the world hadn't changed, and the friction of operating across 2 calendars finally outweighed the internal efficiency gains. Which, right? That is the trap. A better system cannot replace a universal one unless everyone switches simultaneously. And that is exactly what the League of Nations was trying to coordinate. The vote came in 1937. The Calendar Reform Committee had spent 14 years reviewing proposals, running consultations, soliciting expert testimony. They had a recommendation. They had a plan. They had a sponsor in Moses Cotsworth and a proof of concept in Kodak. And the reform failed. Not by a large margin. Not because the technical argument fell apart. It failed because of a blocking coalition led by religious organizations, primarily Jewish groups who objected to Year Day, the blank day outside the weekly cycle, because it would break the uninterrupted count of the Sabbath that had been running, without interruption since antiquity. One vote in Geneva. A single procedural vote, and you would have woken up on January 1st for the rest of your life knowing it was a Sunday. Every year, forever, your children and your grandchildren would never have learned that February has 28 days and sometimes 29, and nobody quite knows how to explain why. That is how close it was. And just so we're clear about when this was, 1937, not 1837, not ancient history. People alive today were born before that vote. The rational calendar was on the table within living memory, and it lost on a procedural motion. Now consider the number 13. Think about how it feels. 13 floors skipped in elevators. 13 left off addresses. Friday the 13th. The documented fear of the number, triskaidekaphobia, which is a real clinical term, has been studied extensively. And here is what the historical record actually shows. The specific, widespread, institutionalized fear of 13 as a number cannot be traced back further than approximately 1910. Before the 20th century, the historical record of 13 as a uniquely cursed number is scattered, inconsistent, and mostly retroactively constructed. The claim that 13 was feared at the Last Supper is a medieval invention. The claim that 13 was feared in Viking mythology is a distortion. The superstition, as a cultural fact, is modern. And the theory, and I want to be careful here because this is a theory, not a documented fact, but it is a theory grounded in something real. The theory is that 13 needed to be made frightening because it was the number of months in the system that had been removed. A 13-month calendar gives 13 equal periods, 13 complete lunar cycles, 13 months of 28 days. A culture that needed you not to think seriously about reorganizing time into 13 equal parts had a reason to make 13 feel wrong at a level below conscious thought. I am not saying that is what happened. I am saying it is consistent with the documented timeline of when the fear appears, and I have not found a better explanation for why 1910. Before we close this, drop a comment and tell me, do you think we'll ever actually fix the calendar, or is the real answer that someone needs it broken? Because here's the thing that I cannot stop thinking about. The thing the whole research trail eventually lands on. There is a country today, right now, not historically, not theoretically, where 120 million people use a calendar that has 13 months. Ethiopia runs on the Ge'ez calendar, which retained a 13th month, pagum, of 5 or 6 days at the end of the year. It is not identical to the Cotsworth proposal. It is an ancient system with its own history, its own theological grounding, its own complexity. But it is a functioning, daily use, nationally administered 13-month calendar operating today, in 2024, used by more people than live in France or the United Kingdom. When Ethiopia markets itself internationally, it uses the slogan 13 months of sunshine. It is printed on tourism materials. It is an ordinary fact there, extraordinary here, which tells you that the arrangement of time we were born into is not the only possible arrangement, not the most rational arrangement, not the arrangement that emerged from any neutral scientific process. It is the arrangement that survived. Survived Roman political manipulation, survived the defeat of a League of Nations reform by one vote, survived 61 years of Kodak quietly proving there was a better way, survived the cultural burial of the number that would have replaced it. September still means 7. October still means 8. The bone is still in Brussels, still notched by a hand that counted the moon before anyone had decided what the moon was for. And every time you write the date on a form, month, day, year, wrong names, inconsistent lengths, 2,000 and some years of unreviewed inheritance, you are participating in the longest-running institutional edit in human history. Nobody reversed it. Nobody had to. The names just stayed. And now you know why.